Today is the marketing brown bag number 5. This is my guest, Ryan Burkhart. Ryan, I've met Ryan, 2 years ago?
Yep.
About 2 years ago. He works at Kong Screenprinting. He's a co-owner. Prior to that, he was an exhibiting artist, an art professor, and worked at another print shop down in Florida. And Ryan kind of has helped me get started with my e-commerce store, and especially Fiesta medals. So Ryan's the designer behind a lot of, or his team behind the Fiesta medals that I make. And so the whole point of this conversation today is really, why do we wear logos? And this is why it was on my mind. I started noticing that my little girl would always be dressed in logos. Here she is, a Wada baby, sharing her Spurs love with her dad, a future Hogwarts magician. Loves Star Wars, gotta love Star Wars. Texas Tech. This says cuter, stronger, faster for when it's time for her to go to gym by Nike. Her little San Antonio shirt for Ciclovia and Reading Rainbow. And so I'm like, this is something very real. Like, people, for whatever reason, if you dress your child in a logo, there's got to be something going on there. So we got Ryan coming in today. We're going to answer that question. Why do people wear logos? But first off, we really need to get a little bit of background. And so I'm gonna ask you first, Ryan, is the designer a dictator, a conjurer, or a facilitator?
That's a really great question. Normally when I'm talking with someone who is asking me to design something, they typically think that I'm either a dictator or a conjurer. But I prefer to see myself as a facilitator. A lot of people sort of wish designers were dictators or conjurers, as if there was some sort of magical thing that we could dip into to pull forward an emotion from a viewer. Or worse yet, using formal methods and design techniques to tell people what to think and tell people how to respond. But in truth, it's really a bit more of a research process that tries to figure out what the structure, the image, and the attitude of the client is, and to make sure that the designs are in alignment with that.
So you're really like a guide, like on a trail in a
way. Absolutely. At least that's how I perceive myself. And I usually try to involve the client in that process and to get them to understand that the best designs are the ones that are going to parallel what they are actually doing with their service or with their product or with their group.
So you're not that magician that says, poof, here's a beautiful design.
No.
People are going to all of a sudden love you and want to buy your shirts and promote you because of your design. Or you're not going to be able to tell people exactly like how to feel. It's really that partnership and being the guide.
That's correct, yeah.
And you kind of got that lesson early on as an exhibiting artist, right?
I did. My ego got knocked down a notch once while I was at an exhibition, and my gallery dealer was trying to sell a painting of mine. And he was talking to the potential client, who wound up buying the painting. But Bill, my gallery dealer, basically made up a whole bunch of lies about what the painting was about. And the person who bought the painting sort of kept going with it and saying, yeah, I see this in it, and I see that in it. And I was sort of complicit and, along for the ride for the sale. But afterwards I spoke to Bill about it. I was like, Bill, why are you telling people that this, painting had this to do with this and that and the other? It's not really anything about that. And he said, oh, you're just a typical artist. You want to think that people buy the painting because of what you see in it. But the only reason that someone's going to buy a piece of your art is because they see themselves in it. And that really stuck with me, and it really kind of put my ego in check too, because then I realized that the best that I could hope for as a visual artist who sees himself as his primary client, that's how I look at myself when I'm in my studio, the best that I could do is put emotions or key points or symbolism into whatever I'm working on and hope that I kind of guide people to that general direction. But what they pull out of it is going to be really dependent upon their own experiences, their own agenda, and I can't really control that.
So when you are talking about out of the studio and more as a designer for brands or companies, what's the number one goal of any designer?
Well, when you're a designer, it's simply, from my point of view, working with a different client. When I'm in the studio, I'm the client. When I'm working as a designer, I have a client who I have to understand what their goals are, what they're trying to achieve, how they're trying to achieve it, and to set a timeline for achieving those goals. And to make sure that the design runs parallel, once again, to whatever those goals are. Oftentimes, being that guide or being that facilitator, I spend so much time just trying to understand the goals of my clients, and many times trying to help them understand the goals of their client, of the project rather. So many times people will sort of jump to something. We're doing something. We need a shirt to promote this. And my first question is, well, why should it be a shirt? Or why does that relate to what you're doing?
So you kind of take that interviewer psychologist role to really sync up what they're trying to do and marry it to design.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And that kind of presents a lot of challenges, right? Mm-hmm. So what's the number one challenge of any designer as they're trying to go through this process?
I think the number one challenge is to get a client to see that you're not a conjurer and you're not a dictator. The most scary thing that I ever hear a client say to me is, "You're the expert, just do something great." Like that, I mean, I would rather have a gun held to my head, metaphorically. It's just such a daunting thing to hear someone say, because they're at that point sort of abdicating and letting go all responsibility for how the project's going to turn out, and they think that you can just magically sort of put things together in a way that's going to meet their goals. That's really scary. So letting them know and meeting that challenge and letting them know that they are an integral part of the process, while simultaneously getting them to let go of any preconceived notions or their taste.
To really have them kind of objectively look at what their brand's perceived at rather than what they want people to see what their brand is, right?
Absolutely. That is a huge challenge, because many times people perceive their own likes or biases as being what their customer or consumer is seeing, but it's not really that way at all.
So what's that example? You had one of a company that maybe you can tell about.
Well, we were talking, are you talking about the grass company?
Yeah.
So I had a company that I was working with called Natural Greens, and their logo is their name with a couple sprigs of grass. What would you imagine that company does? Weed? That's probably not a bad answer. Any other thoughts on that? Lawn care? Other things?
I think like organic produce or something.
Okay. Yeah. They install AstroTurf. But their name and their logo tells you nothing about what they do. And the reason for that is they, from the internal point of view, are so keyed in to what they're doing in their industry. They understand all of the jargon, and their expectation is that anyone who is in the AstroTurf market is going to know that referring to something as greens is going to put them right in that arena.
Man, we face that all the time, just talking in acronyms and all the internal language, and we just get so focused that everyone knows what cloud computing and all these things that we do, but we forget that the outside doesn't.
That's correct. Jargon is the killer of all design. You really want to move beyond that as quickly as possible to establish what the goal is. So if you're creating something like a logo, which I'm working on with them right now, the primary thing there is, how do you identify what your goal is? And the goal is to get recognition, repetition, and also describe a little bit about your personality or your attitude or your approach. Natural Greens is, frankly, very generic. So generic that we don't know if it's weed or if it's produce or if it's lawn care or if it's AstroTurf, right? So keying into an attitude or a tone that informs that logo is what's going to really drive that logo or those merchandising products into a higher consciousness level with the consumer.
Now, okay, we've walked through some of the background. Obviously, you feel a designer is more of a facilitator, some of the goals to sync up and some of the challenges to get people to objectively look at things. So we get back to the first question. Why do people wear logos? Why am I throwing my daughter into these onesies that have logos on it?
I think there's a lot of reasons that people will elect to put things on their body, but it kind of goes back to that analogy or that story I told about Bill, my gallery dealer. The reason that people want to wear logos is because they see themselves in it. So there are really primal reasons that people want to do that. It could be identification with a family or a tribe. The old adage that sex sells is a really pertinent one because it taps into a primal emotion that people feel, and therefore we use that in marketing. So people really want to identify with that. Sometimes it's just peer pressure. You want to be part of something. You know, you're wearing a Texas Forever shirt, right? The national pastime of Texas is sitting around talking about how great Texas is, right? And so, you know, like, and then there's nothing wrong with that. But in essence, when you wear a shirt such as the one that you're wearing today, what you're saying is, hey, you know, I'm just like you. We're from here. Place is really important to me.
And so it's really a reflection of that company's ethos or mentality that a person's almost like, I guess, propagating in a way, right? So and if that person like Nike, or I guess we're just talking about values, right? Like if people believe in friendship and respect, or a Texan, people put themselves, I guess that's why I wear a lot of Whataburger shirts. I love Whataburger. I like the patty melt just as much as anything, but I wear a Whataburger shirt because it's Texan, it's independent, it's, you know, not this corporate monster. You know, it still feels like a local mom and pop shop. And I guess people are reflecting themselves through that brand. So what happens if it's not congruent? What happens if like the brand's trying to be hip, but it has nothing to do with the brand?
Well, then people are going to read something into whatever the branding is on that product that's just not going to match up. If it's incongruent, you know, you know, let's try to think of a big brand. Let's say IBM, since you're all in the tech industry, right? So if IBM comes out and they start, you know, producing branding that is, I don't know, more along the lines of, say, like a Ralph Steadman, or something that is very edgy and cutting edge and controversial, something's not really going to match up there, and your brain's going to have to process something. You're going to have to either say, well, either IBM's trying to get me to kind of turn the canoe and head that way and perceive them as being a little bit different than old, reliable Big Blue, or, and this is the worst case scenario, IBM is lying to me. They are being inauthentic, and they're trying to get me to perceive them as being something that they're not, because I know they're this giant behemoth, and I know that they're really corporate, and yet they're trying to sell me on being the youthful energizer. So that's not going to sync up. So you can't just, the way I describe it to people is when you're standing on top of a mountain and you're looking at another mountain, you can't simply take one step to get there. And yet a lot of the times when you're dealing with clients, they do want to do just that. A great example of this would be Apple. I can't tell you how many times I've spoken with smaller startups in the tech industry in particular who, as their leadership is describing what they're trying to do, say, well, we're just like Apple. Really? Are you? How much money are you investing in design? How do you follow through with your products? How are you using all of the resources within your company to promote this image of proactive design, right? You can't just build a white website that's very minimalistic with clean Helvetica font and a gray logo that's very minimalistic and pop it on the side and say, we're just like Apple, right? There has to be the pathway within how the organization performs, how it services its customers and its clients, how it feels and perceives and follows through with the designs of its products, And then the design of, say, the website, the logo, merchandise, all of those things must parallel that. It must run right alongside it. Because, a branded shirt or a branded item or a branded phone can't really convey the mission statement, the purpose, and the follow-through of a company.
And so without those ingredients, those key ingredients there, it just falls flat. That's where you get the inauthentic.
Or incongruent.
Or incongruent.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think like a great example is Nike.
Mm-hmm.
You say that it totally is someone reflecting their own selves by the brand. The brand is all about just do it.
Yeah.
And you say everyone wants to believe that they can just do it. So that's why they buy it. Like whether or not they're going to go run a 5K or not, they want to buy into that whole mission and vision of the company.
Yeah, I mean, just do it. I mean, I want to wear that, right? I want to believe that about myself, that I just get out there and do it. I know that oftentimes I don't. But putting that messaging and that emotion on my body, if I'm going to wear a Nike branded product, at least kind of reminds me that I have the potential to do that. And that I want to believe that about myself, whether it's true or not, right?
So the last question we're going to get to is kind of the key ways for people to tap into emotion. And you've told me really it's like family and nationality and place. And one of the big examples that you gave that really tapped into place was the Brooklyn Brewery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How many of you are familiar with this logo or this product, this beer? It's great beer. And this logo is a really interesting story. It was designed by a gentleman named Milton Glaser, and there's actually a really wonderful documentary on him. He's been working in the design world for quite a long time. He designed I Heart New York for $10, $20. Way back in the 70s when you really had to be concerned about getting stabbed on the subway and they were trying to change the image of New York and get people to come there. He did that and gave it to the city, and now it's on every street corner, right? He was approached by the Brooklyn Brewery about designing a logo for them, and he came up with this bee and the circular sort of design. If you go to their brewery, it's in stained glass in the top of the brewery. It's really great. The interesting thing about this logo is that they've actually interviewed people from Brooklyn who lived there in the 50s and 60s, and they remember this bee being the bee that was used on the Brooklyn Dodgers baseball uniform. This bee didn't exist until Brooklyn Brewery was founded. It was never on their uniforms. So that's pretty interesting, right? Because he found a way to kind of tie into that emotion of place and to use it in an iconic logo, and to kind of, he definitely was pulling from baseball references, of course. You can look at that, and how many baseball shirts do you see today that have that kind of stylization to them? It's very popular right now. But he pulled from that emotion of history and place, and knowing that, if you're going to name your brewery and you name it Brooklyn, how many people are on your team already? Right? How many people are on your team already? But that's a really important kind of thing to denote, that he really got into that emotion and really tapped it to the point that people actually have invented memories of seeing this thing when they were younger before it even existed.
That's how powerful of a driver that place is.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And then the other one would be like a tribe, like whether that's why sports logos are so popular, Texas stuff, different things that associate you with that particular group. I guess for the tech industry, it would be all the different open source projects. That's so popular to show which open source project you're working on through your shirts. And even probably the most modern thing is stickers on your laptop, Alan Bush over here.
Absolutely. I mean, we Kong, my company, has printed many shirts for Rackspace, and I see those as being an integral part of building team, building personality, and building cohesiveness as you're working on something. And it's also sort of a status thing too.
Yeah.
I think that within the tech industry, T-shirts are a way to sort of, I've seen them used as almost a way to promote or project seniority, or as how long you've been around a place. Oh, that fellow's been around for a while because he worked on that project that we did a long time ago. And it's a visual way to kind of almost establish status within the group without having to say it. I'm working with someone like that right now, actually, who owns a moving company. And sometimes sometimes you have to ask someone, do you like vanilla? And they say, yes. Are you sure you like vanilla? And they say, I love vanilla. And then you serve them the most vanilla thing you possibly can. And they say, I think I like chocolate. Sometimes you really have to give them what they don't want in order to see past their prejudices or sometimes, frankly, it's just an inability to express it. And I understand that and I'm sympathetic to it because you're in it, right? Like designing a logo for my own company, that's a nightmare. I'd much rather design for anyone sitting at this table or anyone on chat in a heartbeat over designing for myself because I'm in the thick of it and my emotions are tied to it. So it's really hard for me to divorce myself from that.
So you even look at yourself objectively?
Yeah, it's really hard to do that. And I'm sympathetic to that and I understand that a client can be that way. So sometimes just showing someone what they don't want can be a way to get them to open up because it's painful, it's not an easy thing, but if you provide them some designs based upon your initial interview, they're going to have a strong reaction to that. And sometimes you have to be a Sherpa or a guide and take those strong reactions and teach them how to temper them.
And I've even seen that, like working with you, it seems like it's always that first step of going from vaporware to the first design is always hard, be it software development, design work, and then you get that design, now you have something to go from, right? Mm-hmm. And I mean, we've seen that, right? I Absolutely. Give you a bunch of ideas and then you give it back and I'm like, whoa, what are you doing, Ryan? This is not even where I went, but I do like that and I like this, and you can learn as much from what someone doesn't like as much as what they do.
One way to get around that is to take the pressure off. So I like to kind of promote it as this idea that everything is a sketch or everything is a draft, right? So like if you say to me, I need help designing this, and I say, okay, what are my goals? What are my objectives? What are my parameters? What's the budget? All those kinds of questions that I need to know what I'm working with. And then I give you something and your first response is, well, I wasn't wowed by it. I got nothing. I have no way to work with that because if you're not wowed by it, that's does not compute, right? It's useless information. That's useless feedback. So really what I want to get into is more that way to say, here's a draft of a potential energy, of a potential design that seems to parallel some of the things that we discussed. No pressure here. If this doesn't work, we can just totally tank this thing because it's just a draft. And that can kind of relieve the pressure because the client often has the emotion wrapped up in this thing that it's going to solve a problem or that it's going to meet a need or that it's going to wow them. And that's not really what the process is about. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, so we'll do a quick lightning round. Okay, so Ryan, your favorite logo that's out there today?
Probably ours. I really am proud of our logo. I didn't design it, by the way. My business partner, Bruce, designed it, but I like it because we just moved into a new facility and we had the opportunity to design that entire space from the ground up. And I love that space. I love going to work there, and people, when they come to that space, are always like, dang, this is cool for a screen printing shop. I was expecting ink everywhere or something, I don't know. And I feel that the logo that we currently have really reflects the attitude that we bring to work every day.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Your favorite visual ad campaign that you've seen recently?
My favorite visual ad campaign? Well, I do think that Apple does a very good job. And they have a really great way of tying in sound with a visual campaign, and they always have done that really well. And they really cue into music and how that works as an activator. I mean, really, since MTV really has gone to reality shows, Apple commercials are kind of the last bastion of videos on television from my point of view. It's kind of like the new MTV that gets you to download a song or, you know. And they do a great job of letting you, the one thing I've always loved about those campaigns is that when they use the silhouettes of people dancing, you can always identify certain signifiers about those people dancing. You can usually identify their age. You can certainly identify their gender, depending upon if they have a hat on or what kind of clothing they're wearing. You can tell if they're urban or not, right? But they're silhouettes, and that just begs you to do what?
Project on it.
Insert yourself into that shape, right? And so, like that idea of seeing yourself in something, they have mastered that with that campaign alone.
Awesome. So your favorite designer?
It's got to be Milton Glaser. I mean, if you can get anybody to feel that way about something that you do, I mean, what a compliment, right? What a compliment to be able to create something and have people say, oh, I remember that from 30 years ago, and it didn't even exist then. I mean, there's something very powerful there.
Your favorite artist?
That would have to be Sigmar Polke, who's a German artist who died about 8 years ago, and he dealt with branding and emotion in a very subversive kind of manner. He also deals with a lot with issues with history, looking back into history and pulling that forward, which I think is kind of interesting when you're talking about logos, because I would like to kind of insert one idea here as we're probably about to wrap up, which is the idea of wearing logos on clothing really dates back to production from a artisanal or the guild system. So when you're looking at things, craftspeople who made tables, who made swords, would put their mark on it, their brand on it, saying, I made this is where I made it, this is when I made it, this is what it was made from. And it was a way for you to tie back into that history, and it was sort of a crafts notion, right? So the idea of contemporary logos, particularly on garments, right, is a very new thing. The graphic t-shirt, as we experience it, has only really been what it is since the late 60s, mid-60s, partly because of advances technically and chemistry-wise in the field of screen printing. It's been able to grow to what it is here. But that idea of a mark being on something really dates back to that craftsman mentality, and we've just started to use it in a different way. And so I like to talk about it from that point of view, particularly if I have a client who's on edge or not sure where to go. Say, well, what if you're not selling software? What if you're not selling coffee? What if you're making a table? If you were making a table, what would you want that table to go out into the world as? And once you reframe the question so that they can take the emotion out of whatever their actual product or service is and put it in a different context that's maybe a little bit more physical, and they can start to think about how they want that perceived, it can really open up avenues to a better conversation.
Awesome. Well, just want to let you guys know before we get out of here, the next brown bag is going to be June 30th. The TBD's been replaced with no one cares about your content, ... yet. It's going to feature a guy from Salesforce, Cliff Seal. I saw his presentation at Dreamforce, and it was amazing. And so be sure to show up for that. And thanks so much, Ryan. I really appreciate you coming in, man.
Thank you for having me. Oh, no, thank you, man. Appreciate it. It's a really cool thing that you put together.
Awesome. Oh, and a quick shout out. How can they find Kong?
Oh, kongscreenprinting.com. We do mostly t-shirts, but we also do embroidery, hats, logo design, all kinds of design. So, check us out. I brought in some stickers if you want one. Check them out. So.
Cool. Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in, guys.